If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address.
How big is that marginal extra voter that she's bringing in? I mean, how much does that change the pool?
1%, maybe 2%. That's it. But that's enough.
Right.
A question that I've seen a lot, mostly from DNC plants, or to be truthful, from people who otherwise are well-meaning, is to ask me, am I worried that Trump's going to lose? See, people seem to take the idea that you say we shouldn't be voting for the Democrats without them offering us anything as advocacy for the Republicans. Now, that could not possibly be more wrong. Anyone who's listened to what I and others in the black media have said should know two things. One, we're not advocating or being operatives for either political party. Something that a lot of the trolls and the plants in the comments section can't say. Most of these people you see online posting messages telling you to vote, they're Democrat operatives, or in many cases, they're not even black. But the second thing you ought to know by now is we're more interested in what our people are doing than we are in what the major parties are doing. That's important because although we don't get any white media coverage, what we do matters, and what we do will actually bring about the changes. But first, we have to resolve to change what we're doing, and then stay the course afterwards. Brother Khalid Muhammad told you that the power structure is already taken into account that occasionally you're going to get upset or even riot or rebel, but that you will also calm down afterwards. Or as Dr. King said, white society concluded that occasionally the Negro has to let off some steam. But in the end, we always keep going back to the status quo ante, and that's what so many Negroes refuse to stop doing. There is no law or universal rule that says that the black man and black woman must continue to exist. We live in a world of competition, one dominated by anti-black racists. If we want to keep from going extinct as a people, then sooner or later we have to start exercising some political literacy. If we don't prove that we're willing to inflict consequences for defying us or for ignoring our interests, then why should anyone listen to us? Notice my wording. I say willing. Even without black voters costing someone an election outright, if we show that as a group we are unified and bowing out of a process that hasn't offered us anything, that in and of itself will get noticed. Even career Democrat operatives like James Carville, among others, have pointed out that the black voter turnout has been trending downward since Obama's second term. That's over a decade now. Keep in mind, Democrats won 3 of the last 5 elections, and yet Democratic strategists are concerned about what black voters have been doing. That's because those Democrat strategists know the only reason they're even able to win elections at all is us. What they don't know is whether enough black people have realized this yet, and if we'll show enough political maturity to capitalize on it. That's why we should sit out these elections. I don't give a rip whether Trump wins or loses. For those of you who asked that question, that's the short answer. I don't care. I only care about us enhancing our own position, and you can't do that if you're silly enough to go along with the get-along. If Kamala Harris wins, that will not change what we do any more than if the orange man wins. But what would change with a Kamala defeat is the political calculus. No matter what alleged cause the white left tries to attribute a Kamala defeat to, they'll know what the real reason was. The only way Kamala Harris can win is the same way Biden won and the same way Obama won, because black voters turned out in numbers. But the problem is that we're not charging anything for our vote, and that's why everybody else is able to leapfrog us. These people you see pretending to be scared of Trump winning, what they're really scared of is having the disapproval of these white Democrats that they answer to. It's just like black conservatives. They claim to be fearless because they mouth off at black people, the most powerless people in the society. You're a coward for that. Tell those black conservatives to challenge white society on its racism. Tell them to confront their GOP pals on all the anti-black racism that they push. They won't do that, and neither will these Democratic shills and plants you see in my comments. To claim that Trump's defeat would be good for democracy, that's more of the thoughts and happy feelings crap. Black people have never enjoyed democracy for a split second in this country. Far as we're concerned, we're still waiting for democracy to come to America. Kamala, your sister girl, wouldn't dare say that. And my common sense won't let me support someone who refuses to acknowledge the realities of my life. Alright, so I hope that answers the question of whether I'm scared of Trump losing. In short, hell no. Because disciplining the black vote isn't about defeating Trump or defeating Kamala Harris. It's about demanding that we get what we're supposed to have. If Trump wins, that's going to be on the Democrats, not us. Now, let's talk about the polls. You can't separate the outcome of the election from the progression of it. So here's my take on the current state of the campaign. Keep in mind that, as the white media pollsters like to say, this is based on the current snapshot of how things stand right now. Will Donald Trump be defeated in November? The answer is a definite maybe. Here's why. First of all, we've been hearing all about Kamala Harris's poll numbers. We haven't heard anything about Trump's. His favorability rating is actually higher now than it was in August of 2020 and far higher than it was in August of 2016. A little factoid that nobody really mentions, and that being the case, while it's not conclusive, it's definitely indicative that the polls are off significantly yet again. The only reason his higher favorability in 2020 failed to keep him in the White House is because he spent 4 years antagonizing black voters until black folks finally mobilized and put him out. I know I said this years ago in my analysis of the 2020 election, but it bears noting, if Trump had run against anyone other than Hillary Clinton in 2016, he would have lost the election. Now, there's some things that need to be reiterated about Hillary Clinton. First of all, she was a candidate of the establishment, especially the establishment media. She may have made their hearts go pitter-pat, but she didn't do it for anybody else. She ran a geographically undesirable campaign. She actually went back 20-some-odd years to a 20th century playbook for the Democrats, which is, let's be the party of the coast. We'll pick up the cities on the West Coast, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, pick up the cities on the East Coast, New York, Boston, like that, DC, and then hopefully we'll score a couple of lucky accidental victories somewhere in flyover country and win. That's what the Democrats did throughout the 20th century. That was good enough for the 20th century, but it wasn't good enough for the 21st. Secondly, she broke faith with her own base, and you don't get to come back from that one. Hillary and Bill ingratiated themselves with the establishment, but the truth of the matter was, after the Clinton years, there was nowhere for their dynasty to go. Likewise, if Joe Biden had run against anyone other than Donald Trump in 2020, and even then he was only able to beat Trump because COVID weakened the economy and sent things into chaos, if that hadn't been the case, Biden would have lost. Just look at what happened this time around. Biden was running against Trump after the Orange Man had staged a coup, and Biden was the one losing, badly. Biden is old, and though Trump doesn't have dementia, at least not the variety Biden has, the reality is Trump is also old as hell too. This is the last gasp of the baby boomers. But I think that one of Trump's greatest liabilities is that his greatest strength has become his greatest weakness. Donald Trump is an entertainer. That's why he doesn't even try to be substantive. He puts on a show. And while it was edgy, daring, and transgressive the first time around, the problem is that people have already seen the Trump Show Season 1, and there's serious question marks as to whether people really want to see Season 2 of the same show, especially when it's become obvious that he has no new material. Trump's peddling the same lines as he did in 2015. His own brand of Reaganomics promises to do, well, something about the border, and of course a huge helping of phony white grievance. People remember when he was president that he did very little about the border, though to be fair, the economy was perceived to be good during his term. Inflation was certainly lower. Problem is, Trump hasn't been running primarily on the economy this time around, and his overemphasis on portraying white people as victims may please his base, but it's not motivating anyone else. And if he's going to prevent the media narrative from taking hold, he's got to start motivating people other than his base to the polls. His base simply isn't enough for him to win. He needs to get other people to vote for him, or he needs those non-MAGA voters to stay home. Right now, he doesn't seem to be on track to get either of those outcomes. Trump still thinks his offensive rhetoric is fresh and shocking, but he's like an old dirty comedian who's still doing the same stale routine he did 20 years ago, not realizing people have been bored with it for years now. It's not so much that people are opposed to Trump. Everyone knows what they're getting with Trump. The problem seems to be that people are apathetic about him. Everything he's saying they've seen and heard before. He's doing something far worse than offending the voters. He's boring them. Hard as it is to believe, Trump has become the one thing no entertainer can afford to be: irrelevant. 8 years ago, he at least gave minor, admittedly insincere lip service to a part of the base that the Democrats had ignored, black voters, and also to unions. The problem was, this time around, he's not even doing that much. If the polls are correct, and that's a big if his momentum has indeed stalled, then the main culprit is what I said years ago. He's not up against Hillary Clinton this time, nor is he up against a lackluster and senile old codger like Biden. Kamala Harris is no political rock star, no matter how the white media tries to hype her up. But the truth is, neither is Trump. If he ever was, he dang sure ain't one now. Donald Trump was a political disruptor for the Republican Party during one election cycle. And in the vacuum created by Hillary's candidacy, that was enough. But it's not 2016 anymore. It seems Trump didn't get the memo, and he never truly wanted to accept the real reason that he actually won the election in 2016. He wants to believe that it was his irresistible charisma and that people were so impressed by him, but in actuality, the Democrats' benign neglect finally bit them in the behinds. When Trump ran in 2016, he seized on that fact when he would openly tell black voters, "What have you got to lose?" Now let's be honest, no black person, not even these pretend black conservatives, actually thought that Donald Trump was going to do anything for black voters. Like the Democrats, he didn't actually say what he would do, and no, his platinum plan doesn't count. I did a video on this very channel debunking it, so don't try it. But his pathetic pretend lip service to black people drew a sharp contrast to Hillary Clinton's refusal to go to black voters at all. And then there was her super predator remarks and her talk about hard-working white voters. Black people saw Trump's lunk-headed, clumsy outreach and felt that this pathetic gesture was more than Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were doing, and sad to say, they were right. And while it didn't get him any black votes, it did the next best thing. It made black voters decide that it was just too much trouble to vote for a woman who clearly didn't want to offer black people anything at all. Hillary created a political vacuum, and Trump filled it, however awkwardly. Problem is, Trump thought that this meant black people liked him, and that he had the luxury of spitting in our faces. He was wrong on both counts. The GOP bet all its chips on being the white man's party, but as Lindsey Graham said, the Republicans simply aren't generating enough angry white males to win office. All their performative extremism of the last few years has only served to mobilize an ever-shrinking, ever more irrelevant swath of racist malcontents. Yes, Democrats have done nothing to attract voters, but Republicans have openly and actively driven voters away. This is where the joke comes from that Fox News is the 65 to dead demo. Their base is literally dying. The electorate has been trending away from the GOP for generations now, but rather than becoming the party of solving the voters' issues, instead, the GOP has opted to be the party of white nostalgia and phony grievance. As a result, young voters don't vote for them. The American population is becoming less religious and more secular, so the power of the religious right is fading. Even white suburban voters have become gradually disenchanted with supporting the corporate class, so making arguments to protect the plutocracy is failing. When people can't get ahead and they can see that their opportunities are being wholesale given to the richest people in the country, you sound stupid telling them to keep taxes for the rich low. The Republicans' obsession with culture war has been nothing more than a clumsy smokescreen meant to distract voters from the economic issues caused by the donor class's refusal to stop doing the things that destroyed the American dream in the first place. Elections are ultimately about economic issues, and in this climate where inflation is rampant, housing prices are only going up, jobs are a joke, and nobody's actually saying what they're going to do about it, no one really wants to hear more phony white outrage about DEI. That works for the racist rubes on the internet, but it won't win a single election. Don't believe it? Ask Ron DeSantis how well beating the drum of DEI did for him. He single-handedly put that phrase into the media cycle, and he didn't win even one election doing that. Whining about history books and non-existent white victimhood doesn't pay the bills, and if you care about white children's feelings, why don't you care that they can't buy a house or even support themselves? Critical race theory isn't the reason that white youth can't buy a house or find a job that's worthwhile. It's white corporations like BlackRock and Airbnb who made home ownership impossible, and it's all the other white corporations who have made a good job into an oxymoron. And these white voters know it, so yeah, they'll cheer for stupidity like the Stop Woke Act, but that's only a momentary sugar rush. Inevitably, they have to return to their own empty, depressing lives, and they see that these political insults to black people aren't making their lives any better, and their would-be culture warrior heroes have done nothing to change this. Another example of how Trump's campaign may indeed be taking on water is tone deafness. Recently, Trump decided to do a Twitter sit-down with Elon Musk. Gee, the last politician who thought that he would win an election on Twitter was Ron DeSantis. Anyone remember how that Twitter live stream went? I'm serious. Does anyone remember? Because I sure can't. Legend has it they're still trying to work out the technical difficulties on that one. Trump seems to have forgotten that while Twitter was key to getting out the message, that was mostly while he was just a candidate. As a former president, the people who know who he is and what he allegedly stands for already know where to find him. Trump needs to be on the road, not on the internet. But just like DeSantis, he likes the internet because he gets the sugar rush of all the online bigots concentrating in one place, praising him and telling him his wrinkled racist behind smells like roses. DeSantis did the same thing, taking refuge online because he couldn't deal with the real world which had rejected him. DeSantis has been in a political bubble and didn't want to come out. As a result, he ran so far to the right he fell off a cliff. Whether Trump realizes it or not, he's duplicating much of DeSantis' playbook, and he'll get the same results if he doesn't stop. And speaking of people who are scared of rejection, Kamala Harris is also in hiding, just like Biden was. It's obvious that the entire strategy of Kamala and her handlers is to stall for time. I can't do any press conferences with the media until after the election, she says, by which time it'll be September. And then she'll claim she's too busy to do a press conference or anything then because she's campaigning. As they see it, all they have to do is make it through the next 60 days. If they can just avoid the cameras for 2 months, they'll have a real shot at holding the White House. That's where this phony wave of fake white media hype comes in. Kamala's success, quote-unquote, with the voters is almost entirely a white media mirage. Kamala herself has been in hiding in a basement. Everyone knows that when she talks, she makes a fool of herself, so the strategy is don't let her talk. Trump should be turning her refusal to come outside into a weakness, make it excruciatingly clear she's afraid to face the public or the media, and she's too timid to be president as a result. But he can only do that if he fills the vacuum left by her absence, and he can't do that on Twitter. And what did Trump and Musk talk about, by the way? Nothing of substance, that's for sure. Nobody's talking about his Twitter interview, so how much good did it actually do him? And this gets to another part of why Trump's campaign may indeed have stalled out. He spends way too much time talking about his own problems and not his voters. Here's why he does that. Trump's strategy has been to lean heavy into presenting himself as an avatar for angry white males. He's the white guy who's going to say out loud every bigoted, contemptible thing he can, which gets him a pat on the back and a few attaboys, and for someone as emotionally vapid as Trump, that becomes a vicious cycle. And since that's his identity, he figured when he's venting his own personal petty grievances that this will translate to white males across the board and that they will see themselves in him, no matter how irrelevant his gripe of the moment may be. That's why he keeps talking about how he's their revenge and he's their retribution. He doesn't talk about policy. Instead, he's decided to repeat the Christopher Rufo strategy of trying to drive the left crazy by saying and doing all kinds of absurdly racist stuff. It's all psychological masturbation. It may feel good in the moment, but it accomplishes nothing. Now, as a narcissist, Trump always wants to talk about himself, and he may feel that because angry white males identify with him, this is self-reinforcing. But it doesn't seem to be, at least not as much as he needs. He's stopped talking so much about things that might matter to his base, and instead he's just going on and on about his own problems. I guess without Steve Bannon to hold his hand, Trump is having trouble staying on message. Trump seems to have forgotten. It took a perfect political storm to sweep him into office in 2016. A derelict Republican political establishment that had lost the support of their base, and a Democrat establishment who had also done the same. 8 years ago, he had the good fortune of running during a time when the landscape was littered with a whole bunch of pathetic candidates who only reassured the voters that a huge political earthquake was more than necessary, and also a pundit class who were so busy huffing their own farts they didn't realize how wrong they were and how out of touch they were with the public. But no storm lasts forever, not even a perfect one. And when the seas had finally calmed, rather than chart the right course, Trump instead went full steam ahead without realizing he was heading straight into an iceberg. Black voters stayed home in 2016. That and that alone is what handed Trump the presidency, and nothing else. And while black voters are not champing at the bit to run out and vote for Kamala, the reality is they weren't excited about a second Obama term either, or a Biden presidency for that matter. But if enough black voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Atlanta decide to turn out, well, Kamala doesn't need a huge groundswell of black support. Just a moderate amount will be more than sufficient. That's why her handlers are keeping her in hiding, making sure she does a few appearances just to maintain a little bit of presence, and making doubly sure to always have a lot of black people jumping and screaming behind her. Keep her on the teleprompter and away from any impromptu sessions. This election will be decided by a few percentage points no matter what happens, and it would be very easy for Kamala to botch things. Her support has not been from people who like her. Most of them don't know anything about her. It's mostly people reacting to the talk about Project 2025 and others who just don't want to see more of Trump's now stale, played-out antics. It's been decades since there was a presidential landslide election. Most presidential races for the last 30 years have been practically within the margin of error. That's why even now, with all the white media's pretend orgasms about how great Kamala's doing, not one of them is actually willing to say she's going to win. But this Sunday address isn't about Kamala's chances of winning. It's about Trump's. And his own political momentum is looking more like 2020 than 2016. Trump's going to need some new material if he's going to retake the White House. But at his age, can this old dog learn some new tricks? The problem for Trump isn't that Kamala Harris is some political juggernaut. Even her own supporters, if they're honest, will admit that's not true. Seriously, it says a lot that she's not 15 points ahead of this guy in the polls, considering that Hillary Clinton was at a minimum a consistent 10 percentage points ahead of Trump for practically all of her campaign. But that is up until she lost the election. We've been here before. Polls have been wrong, though they weren't wrong in 2020, but we all know why that was. The orange man in his infinite stupidity chose to awaken a sleeping giant, the black vote, and black voters were so tired of his racist rhetoric, they threw him out. He was counting on Democrats throwing away this election too by running another decrepit boomer loser candidate that would make the race into a level playing field for him. Simply by placing someone younger on the ballot, that seems to have had some marginal positive impact for Democrats by giving a contrast of the old and the new, even if the candidate herself is sorely lacking. And there's a long-standing history of this among the Democrats: John Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. Democrats seem to have figured out decades ago that old ideas can seem to be fresh and new if presented by a younger person. Trump's biggest problem is that a lot of people are simply turned off by yet another gray-headed boomer, yet another old man with old ideas and even older rhetoric. He sounds like Archie Bunker, and while that was at least edgy and daring when he first did it 8 years ago, now it's stale. He seems like he's literally getting his talking points from reruns of All in the Family. This country is a gerontocracy. That means the rule of the oldest. Now, I'm a Gen Xer, and it's typical for the younger generation to blame things on their immediate predecessors. But you know that I don't do that because I'm a student of history. The boomers are the most selfish, least responsible generation in the history of the world. Not all, but most. They created most of the problems that we're having to contend with. They also wrecked this country to a large degree, and in catering to them for so long, America has crippled itself. For 30 years, the boomers have held the presidency, and what's been the result? Have things gotten markedly better or undeniably worse? And here you have more boomers, one foot in the grave, demanding at this late date that they still be in charge. People have talked about the great generational wealth transfer that was supposed to have happened as the boomers die off, but that's been more sizzle than steak. Why? Because while it's true the country has invested a lot in the baby boomers and given them everything, it's also true that the boomers squandered it. Least responsible generation, remember? A lot of the boomers are dying in debt, their homes repossessed in their old age, their savings depleted because they were as careless with their money in life as they were with their children's futures. The elderly in America grew old, but they never grew up. And we see this trend magnified many times over in politics. Biden isn't the only political fossil who needs to resign. Decades ago, Mitch McConnell was going catatonic live on air. The country understands that a huge part of the problems it faces is that these old politicians haven't done anything other than build their own political machines, whose sole purpose was to keep them in office. The foreign policy messes we have, like Israel, are the result of these old codgers. The young people you see protesting on college campuses, these Gen Zers, they're the children of Generation X. So at least on the issues of the Middle East, we can see what Gen Xers might think and how radically different it is from our parents. So the political generation gap is real. And to be fair, I've seen a few people mentioning this fact, but understand something. When it comes to the cancerous impact of money on American politics, Kamala Harris is every bit as corrupt and antiquated in her thinking as a Joe Biden or a Nancy Pelosi. Hell, both Kamala Harris and Pelosi come from San Francisco, both of them are inventions of the California political machine, and both of them have the exact same donors and have pledged to uphold the exact same failed policies too. There's no fool like an old fool, and the rich masters of America know that these aged dinosaurs are easily manipulated. We see so much of how technology has been used to rip the public off. But the politicians don't care because they're so old and they don't even use the technology to begin with. And even the ones who do, it's their political aides who actually operate their cell phones and their online social media accounts and what few pieces of modern tech they actually use. And the same corporations who attack us every minute of the day give special exemptions and special treatment to these boomer politicians. So they're never actually touched by these disastrous corporate policies. And this is why banning TikTok is what passes for Congress being informed about technology. But the reality is they were told to do so by AIPAC because the Israeli government doesn't like the fact that TikTok has become a place where you can post all of Israel's war crimes without being penalized. But that's not to say the rich masters of America have some special place in their hearts for the boomer puppets they wield, or that they can't do without them. They've been running America far longer than the boomers have. When Biden was a young man 50 years ago, it was those same icy political forces who seamlessly changed their support from the Strom Thurmonds and the Senator Easterlings and other segregationists to the young boomers like Biden who were running for office. And the Bidens of the world were only too eager to perpetuate and even reinforce the corrupt system that they lied to the voters and claimed that they were going to change. And how much of a change was there between the silent generation or the World War II generation and the boomers? None. That's because when it comes to politics, these people who run for office and get support of these big money donors, they're not in step with their own generation. You can't be and win high office because no generation wants to be ignored by the government that's supposed to be serving them. And yet for several decades now, that's exactly what we've seen. So I understand why there's a number of the people who want to support Kamala because they're hoping for a changing of the guard. I can understand that impulse, but remember, even a new guard is still defending the same old castle and the same old kings. About the only good thing, and I put good in quotes, that might come out of a Kamala victory is that for the first time in a long time when it comes to running for office, America may become no country for old men. But that doesn't mean very much if the younger people are still representing the same old ideas. The one or two good things about a Kamala victory are psychological masturbation because this younger generation of candidates aren't actually promising to do anything just like their predecessors didn't. Remember, the entire reason Obama was a rock star was because of his youth. He was noticeably younger than John McCain or Mitt Romney. Okay, and what did the younger, hip Obama do for black people? He insulted us, he lectured us, he condescended to us, and when he wasn't doing that, he was just ignoring us. We have to stop looking for cosmetic differences and start looking for real change. Politicians are experts at using weasel words to make you think they're going to do things that they never actually promised to do. They use flowery prose and soaring rhetoric to trick you, but if you actually listen, you'll notice that there's no real promises being made. Instead, there's these big gaps where the promises are supposed to be. That's where the flowery prose and soaring rhetoric comes in. People are facing real problems, and they're so desperate to believe that this empty suit in front of them is going to address at least some of them. Rather than demand actual policies, they instead will allow their imaginations to take over and fill in all those blanks. Obama talks about empty phrases like prosperity. Trump talks about the forgotten man, meaning white primacy. And both their voters imagine that this means that these men are going to bring back the jobs that got sent overseas, or that they'll stop these investment firms from buying up entire neighborhoods. But neither of the candidates dares to say even a peep about those things, because the plutocrats who exported the jobs and who bought up all the houses are the same ones who fund both major parties. Hell, even in Biden's case, he made specific promises and didn't fulfill a single one. So even if you do force the guy to go ahead and say he's going to do something for you, the chances are overwhelming he'll break his word shamelessly. And Kamala Harris is Biden's VP. She has to answer for his actions too, because his failure is hers. She whines about Palestine, but doesn't say a word about black people's plight in the U.S., which is far worse. No black person in their right mind should support her without first confronting her about all of these broken promises that she and Biden made 4 years ago. She was neck deep in it right alongside him. And how she hasn't even acknowledged it in the last 4 years. How can we believe her current slate of promises when she failed to deliver on any of her old ones? These are common sense questions, but unfortunately when it comes to the voters, common sense ain't so common. To call yourself voting for someone and lecturing the rest of us for not doing so when this person's done nothing but break their promises to us, that is off code as hell. So my current take on this political moment is that Trump isn't getting whipped by Kamala, and in all likelihood, the polls aren't as rosy for Kamala as the white media is making them out to be. But the problem for Trump is that this isn't 2016. The entire reason he won back then was because there was a massive political vacuum 8 years ago. That's not the case this time around. Sure, the vacuum is still there, but it's a smaller one now. He's not a political disruptor anymore. He is at best, and I put best in quotes, a reformer. And when I say reformer, I mean that in the absolute loosest, most abstract sense of the term. Trump is not taking advantage of the things that could work in his favor. He's not attacking Kamala's weaknesses, nor is he trying to appeal to those centrists who feel that the last 4 years didn't do anything to benefit them. These were the strategies that he used 8 years ago, but he's abandoned them. When a campaign has failed, it doesn't seem all that obvious at first. The numbers seem to be tight and they seem to be holding, but as you get closer to election day, the gap widens until then on election day you get the final results and it wasn't even close. That's how a campaign collapse actually happens. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The polls don't tell the story, but lack of clear direction from his campaign does. In 2016, they actually had a strategy. This time around, it's fly by the seat of your pants, apparently. And at the rate that these things are going, the only concession speech he'll be making in November will be when he surrenders himself to be arrested again. And there won't be any Capitol riot this time around. He won't have the bully pulpit of the presidency to draw throngs of racist rioters to D.C. He'll just be a twice defeated ex-president who just can't let go of the fact that America doesn't want him anymore. And while his angry white supporters will predictably complain that Kamala couldn't have beaten him, the reality is she should never have been able to. But in politics, the landscape is constantly in flux, constantly changing. It's the reason America could elect a biracial president twice in a row and then immediately afterwards elect a game show host who spouts angry white rhetoric and then throw him out of office after just 4 years because he continued to spout that same angry white rhetoric. The tectonic plates are in constant motion, but one thing that must remain the same is our total commitment to what we are owed and what we must have. See, that's what these Democrat and Republican shills, plants, and operatives will never understand. That's why they're always asking the same stupid question about our political stance, because to them it's incomprehensible. To them, politics is a binary equation. You have to vote for one candidate or the other, and you have an obligation to vote because, well, you want to work for them one day. That's their real motivation. But in the world of black empowerment, politics are not a binary equation. It's a one-way street. For us, when someone comes along asking, but aren't you concerned that Trump's going to lose? We're not betting our chips on a Trump victory. Our goal is to reshape the landscape so that from now on, no matter who loses, we win. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. James Dinkins, Tracy Norton, Othniel Malcolm, Selena Williams, and Stephanie Rozelle. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.